Sydney, how are you?
I'm good. It was a good Labor Day weekend, so glad to be back in the office though.
Yeah, you had I haven't really asked you about that. You had an awesome
Yes.
speaking of Labor Day, actually let me bring this up, but yeah, why won't you I know that you were traveling. Where exactly did you go?
My family went to Gulf Shores in Alabama, so kind of the peninsula that runs off of Alabama. It was beautiful. It was super fun.
Well, maybe you're seeing my screen here now. There's actually an option to zoom in. Yeah, give it a few more seconds here while people are rolling in. Um, Welcome everyone. For you guys that are already in here, we're going to give it a few more seconds. But happy belated Labor Day to everyone. Hope you guys had a good long weekend and got to do a little bit of this potentially. And Sydney, you know from talking to for our clients, some of you are retired and kind of already in this phase of life. Some of you have described your days are pretty much like this. So maybe
Mhm.
maybe you're already in that stage, but if not, then hope you made the most of the 3 day weekend. So
Yes.
um, let me pop that off here. Well, again, welcome everyone. Everyone's probably in at this point. Hope you guys had a good Labor Day weekend. We're going to be talking today about HSAs and FSAs. And if you don't recognize those acronyms, what that is a health savings account and a flexible spending account. So what those are is if you're listening and you're saying, I've never heard about that, I don't know what that is, keep watching because even if that's you, it's fairly common for somebody to have that reaction. Um, there's an opportunity that you may have to utilize one of these accounts or what they are really is medical saving plans. So we're huge fans of them here in the world of finance and tax beneficial accounts. They're relatively new, and their popularity, I think, is statistically it's been shown to be growing pretty rapidly. And maybe once you know a little bit more about them, you might say, "Hey, I really want to take advantage of that." So I know, Sydney, you were sharing as we were getting ready for this. You were saying that you were not too familiar. I know you've heard of an HSA, but what was what have you learned, or I guess what has been the main surprising thing when you were hearing about these HSA accounts? Was
Yeah, definitely more familiar with the HSA than the FSA. So this is going to be interesting for me too. I got a little sneak peek as we were kind of talking about it and, heard about it through my studies. But definitely the employee versus the employer, kind of the ownership of that account. I think that kind of will fall into a lot of what you're going to talk about. But that was new information for me. And so really who owns those assets, who owns the money that's in those accounts? Yeah, that
mm-hmm.
was that was pretty new. And then it seems like that influences a lot of how the accounts are managed, what's allowed in them, what's not allowed in them. So that was pretty interesting. I know you're going to cover a lot of that stuff, but
Yeah. Well, we have started to get more and more questions, and I would say a lot of people absolutely. If you're listening to this, you said I've never heard about those accounts. You're not alone. That's most people. And we've been getting more and more questions. Um, Employers are adding this as an option a lot of times to employees that didn't have access to them. But they can offer some awesome benefits at some point, whether you're using a lot of healthcare right now, or maybe you're young and you say, I'm not using any healthcare right now. One of these accounts, especially the HSA, I hope grabs your attention because it can have huge benefits down the road. And so with that, we'll kind of jump in. So what these accounts are, HSA and FSA, what they are is a way that the government has allowed you to save for expected future healthcare expenses. Um, and they want to allow people to save in a tax efficient way so that they can cover their medical costs. So the hope also, I think, is that it's a process that helps control and reduce the cost of healthcare over time. So I made a chart because if you Google, there's of course a lot of information out there like there is on everything. And I really tried to consolidate what we know about HSA and FSA. So some of you are more visual. I'm going to pop this up on the screen here. Let me switch that over. Actually.
Yeah, and this visual was super helpful. I think anyone who sees it today is going to find it also very informative.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here, again, up at the top, you can see HSA is on the column on the left and FSA is on the right. I just wanted to go through and talk about some of the differences. Now, if you're watching this video and you can say, I'm not using those, but I've seen those on maybe some kind of correspondence from my employer. If you have access to one of these, you probably have access to both. They usually go hand in hand. Now, the HSA and the FSA, there's key differences, but you can see the very first one that's probably the most important thing for people to understand is your employer may say, hey, you can put in this much each month. When you add money to these accounts with the HSA, you're adding those funds into something that you own as the employee. If it goes in the FSA, then those are funds that you can use, but you don't actually own them. And so maybe that's something that bothers you to be putting money, your own money into something. But both of these accounts, you can fund them through your paycheck reduction that your employer will take out for you before you get paid. But also more and more, we're seeing companies that are actually putting money into these accounts for their employees just as a perk or as an additional employee benefit. They may add a little bit, or they may, try to have an arrangement where you guys are adding together. But the main difference in terms of ownership, HSA you own and FSA your employer owns. And with that comes a lot of trickle downs on how the account can be used and what you can do with it. So both of them are funded by you as an employee and your employer. They have a different amount that you can put in each year. And you can see over on the left here, it's not a huge amount, but on the HSA, if you're single, then you can put in about just over 3,500. If you have a family or you're married, then you can put in 7,100 into the HSA. And it's a little bit smaller for the FSA. You can only do about 2,750 into that. And then there's a dependent care. That's when you see dependent care, it's basically talking about childcare. So you can actually use an FSA to pay for like daycare type expenses and things like that. So they'll let you put a little bit more. Daycare is pretty expensive. Some of you would know that. The other before I go further on this, I just want to say that we, of course, everybody knows how expensive healthcare is. If you are using money in your bank account to pay for medical bills or healthcare expenses, co-pays, going by the pharmacy, the money in your bank account is what would be considered after tax. So basically it's come to you from a paycheck or maybe from investments, but if there was any taxes that is due on that money, then you basically already paid taxes on it, or you're going to right at the end of the year. So both of these accounts, any money that goes into them without you having to pay tax. Kind of how if you put money into a 401k, you get a tax deduction. It's a similar thing for both of these accounts. So think the money goes in. If the money's hasn't had taxes been paid on it, then that's just more of your money that can go to pay for these things from these accounts. So that's really the incentive for setting them up. But with that in mind, going back to this contribution here, this max annual contribution. If you're single and you're saying, hey, maybe I should have one of these accounts, the primary requirement for using an HSA is going to be that you have to have a high deductible healthcare plan. And most of the time you're going to be getting that through your employer. Maybe your employer says, okay, we have healthcare available to our employees. You may select an option that has a high deductible, meaning the healthcare plan won't pay for any of your medical expenses until maybe you have $5,000 in healthcare expenses. So basically, if you have a healthcare plan where you're covering all of the expenses before the healthcare will start to help you out, then that would describe a high deductible healthcare plan. If you're young, that might make sense for you. So again, going back to young people taking advantage of this, if you, number one thing, first look and ask yourself, do I have access to a high deductible healthcare plan at my employer? If you do, it might be the right choice for you. And if you are already participating in one of those, then I would absolutely use this HSA account. And even if you're self-employed, you can still actually have a high deductible healthcare plan and use one of these as well. So that's the main requirement, I guess, and difference in terms of what you already have to have in place. So if you have a high deductible healthcare plan, you can use one of these or the other, the HSA or the FSA. If you don't have a high deductible healthcare plan, then you can still use the FSA account. So the IRS, the government says you can use an FSA whether you don't even actually have to have a healthcare plan, believe it or not. But the unique thing is it has to be available to you through your work. Now, if you have access, if you say you're in a high deductible healthcare plan and you're saying, well, wise counsel, which one of these should I use? Because I can only really use one. There is some account types of FSA that you can use both, but they're uniquely crafted and they're not widely as available and they don't offer as many benefits. But you're saying, okay, which one of these should I use? We are almost always going to point you towards the HSA. And the reason for that is not just because you own it, but because you can take it with you in the future and it stays with you. So if you put money into the HSA account and let's just say you add $1,000 into it for this year, you'll get basically $1,000 you don't have to pay taxes on. And then you can roll that money over to future years if you don't ever use it. The FSA, on the other hand, if you put $1,000 into that, again, you won't have to pay tax on it. But if you get to the end of the year and you haven't used that $1,000, then most of the time it's just going to go away. I think the max amount that and it comes down to the employer, some of them will allow you to keep a maximum of 5%. So you'd only basically, with that $1,000, get to use 50 towards the next year. So you can see that you're probably, okay, I'm putting money into something. I don't even know if I'm going to use it. That doesn't sound like a good deal. Well, you're right. And we like that you can roll over money from the HSA into future years. The other thing is you might be saying, okay, well, maybe I'm in the tech industry. I'm in a job where I don't think I'm going to be here that long. If you're adding money into the FSA, again, it's not only gone, at the end of the year if you don't use it, but if you leave your company or you no longer work there halfway through the year, that money also goes away. So again, the employer owns that money that goes into there, even if you're putting it in, and it's not portable with you. Huge difference there. So that's one of the main reasons we would say, okay, you may have a place that you're saving into your 401k. Of course, those can move with you to different jobs. And HSA is like that in that regard. You can move it to a new employer. You can, it goes with you. If you leave during the year or you leave, 10 years from now, it can continue to build up in that account and you're not going to lose it. Going on down the table here, one of the big differences that kind of bothers some people as well about the FSA is an FSA is kind of like it's a choice that you make during the year and you have to decide for the entire year what you're going to do. Kind of like if you choose to, sometimes if you choose to add money into a 401k, they only let you change it so often. And FSA is like that. So when it comes to open enrollment or you're joining the company, they'll say, hey, how much do you want to put in your FSA? Well, if you choose to put in, let's just say $300 a month, you're basically locked in for the whole year. So you can't change it. And the irony of it, Sydney, is that the name of it is flexible as in the name, the flexible spending account, right? But it's actually far less flexible than the HSA account. So you choose at the beginning of the year, I want to put this much into it each month or have this much taken from each paycheck. And you're just locked in. If money gets tight or your expenses go up, then you really can't change anything there. The HSA, on the other hand, if you say, hey, I want to add in $300 a month, a few months later, something happens, you can reduce that down to zero. So there is much more flexibility in how much you're able to put in or how much you want to have withheld from your paycheck. So we like that. Going on down, another huge difference, the HSA account, the money that goes in there, it doesn't just have to sit there in cash. So you may put in $1,000. It just doesn't have to stay there and not earn anything. The money that goes in can actually be invested. So much like the money going in your 401k, it can be invested in funds. And that's pretty awesome, right? You're saying, okay, I can save money for future medical expenses and I can actually have it growing and being productive. And so the HSA has that component. FSA doesn't. Money going into the FSA, not only is it gone at the end of the year, but it doesn't grow in the meantime. It's just there, and it sits kind of like it would in your checking account. So you're starting to be able to tell going through these options that the HSA really has the potential to be a long-term thing, and the FSA is really kind of a short-term, use it or lose it type account. You can't be invested, the HSA can, and so we see HSAs kind of like as an alternative to your long-term savings, because when the government was creating these, one of the cool things they did is they said, if someone adds money to this account, it's growing, it's building, right? Eventually we hope it's going to get huge. You got a tax deduction. Say, okay, all right, Zach, what if I build up enough money in there and never end up using it? Does it go away? Well, it doesn't. If you save up and then you're in your 60s and you retire and you just have this huge balance in this HSA, the government says that you can eventually use that for anything, kind of the same way you would the money go into your 401k. So you're getting a tax deduction, putting it in, it's invested and it's going to grow tax-free. You're not going to have to pay tax on it while it's growing. And then while you're working and you're young, if you use it for medical expenses, there's no tax then. But if you get over 65, you can actually take the money out of there and there's no penalty whether you use it for medical expenses or not. So we love HSA accounts. We highly, highly recommend that if you have access to one, start using it. If you don't know if you have access, call your HR department or the person that does your payroll and see if they have an HSA available. Of course, first you're going to have to check and see if you're currently in a high deductible healthcare plan, but see if they have one of those available and really take a close look at participating in those. So we don't actually manage the funds in an HSA account, but as financial advisors, we're routinely coming into people that have access to those. So we're happy to help you sort through the process of those account types and whether one might be the right answer for you in your financial situation. So go ahead and take a look at those accounts, see if you have one available. If you do, then give us a ring and we're happy to help go through and see if it's the right thing for you. Just kind of going on down the list before we finish up, wanted to go through and talk about the childcare component of an FSA. We mentioned that earlier at the beginning, but if you're someone, say you're not participating in a high deductible healthcare plan, if you have children that are in daycare or some form of childcare, then definitely consider using an FSA. Again, they're short term, but one of the things you may do as a strategy to pay for those daycare expenses is you might say, okay, well, my daycare, it's costing us about $500 a month to keep the kids there. You could, with that in mind, have $500 a month going into the FSA. And now, instead of you paying that $500 in daycare expenses from your bank account that you've already paid taxes on, you can pay from it from the FSA. And so the government's basically you've created a situation for yourself where the government is not charging you tax on the money that you're using for your daycare. So again, there's pros and cons to each of these. We are, for the most part, fans of the HSA, but if you are not in a high deductible healthcare plan or you don't have one of those available, then maybe the FSA can be a benefit for you, especially if you're in that healthcare stage or a childcare stage of life that you need that. We're happy to send this. I think we're actually going to create this table here in some kind of format that we can get to you guys more quickly. If you have anybody that you're talking with at work that maybe is using one of these and you haven't really taken a close look at, happy to go over that with you. But we hope that you've learned a little bit more about HSAs and FSA, and obviously, just like everything financially related, really comes down to your specific situation. So I don't want to overemphasize doing these if it puts you, if you've got some other priorities. But please give us a call, and we can help sort through whether one's the right fit for you. But that's really all that we had today. Any last thoughts, Sydney, on HSAs or FSAs?
Yeah, I mean, this has been really great, informative, even for me. But I think, you already said it, but the HSA, has a lot of benefits, but there's always an exception. So reach out, we'd love to talk to you about the options. Maybe, childcare is a big thing, or, whatever else it is. We would love to kind of help weed through that as you're also thinking and processing. So yeah, and this will be recorded, and hopefully, we can share it with people here in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so next week, just to give you guys a heads up, we'll be talking about simple IRAs. Type of IRA, if you're self-employed or you have 1099 or self-employed income, definitely want to listen in for that one. It's an option to fund some money in for tax deductions. Also, if you're a small business owner and you're saying, hey, I've got a few employees, but maybe a 401k plan is a little bit more than we want to deal with at this point. A simple IRA plan might be the right fit for you. So it's a great option for small businesses. If you have 2 to 10 employees or something like that, most people choose to go that direction. So we'll be talking about that next week, and hope that you guys can join us. Until then, hope y'all have a wonderful week, and hope to talk with you soon. Take care, guys.
Bye.